Welcome to this edition of Speakeasy. Today you'll meet the director of the 2025 American Inside Free Speech Award-winning film called Gerry Adams, A Ballymurphy Man. Gerry Adams is arguably one of the most consequential political figures of the past 50 years and undeniably one of the most controversial. Born into a large family in the Ballymurphy neighborhood of Belfast, Adams joined the Catholic civil rights struggle as a teen in the 1960s. For over 60 years, he fought to gain rights for Catholics in Northern Ireland and to end British rule there, which would have created a single sovereign state of Ireland. In the process, he was shot, imprisoned, and beaten, but he went on to lead the nationalist political party Sinn Féin and ultimately became one of the architects of the remarkable peace settlement called the Good Friday Agreement that put an end to sectarian violence that had pitted Catholics and Protestants against each other and Catholics against the British government and military for decades. Some people view Adams as a man of peace. Others see him as one of the perpetrators of violence. This film is not the definitive investigation of those differing views, but rather an intimate look at one man who lived his life in the vortex of one of the most intractable conflicts of the 20th century, often referred to as the Troubles. For the first time, Adams, in his own voice, tells the story of that life. The film is a masterful work of production with compelling archival footage, along with home movies of Gerry and his family, plus powerful photographs, many of which have not been seen before. The original music and the sound design bathe the piece in the cultural and historical moment. Let's take a look at the film's trailer.
For me, one of the best periods of my activism was in that 69-70, when the entire community of the greater Ballymurphy area rose up. So in other countries it was race or colour, and in our case it was creed. We had a meeting with the people that it has to be about empowerment of people. The most invidious type of colonisation is cultural, where you colonise people's minds, so you do away with their language, with their values. I was 15. That if you're involved in struggle, that there may be a trigger point or some event that brings you into activism. The elites, those who generally rule us or govern us, thrive on division. I was arrested and beaten repeatedly. I suppose if you really believe in something, then you gotta do something about it. So make it stand. And then there were a number of very loud cracks. I screamed, "Don't stop, keep driving." I've been blessed with very bad assassins.
We have to ensure that everyone's rights are underpinned.
When they could sit down and discuss peace.
What's wrong with people sitting down and talking? So it worked for Ireland, could be utilised in the Middle East. It could bring about peace in other places.
I'm thrilled to welcome Trisha Ziff to the Speakeasy today. Welcome, Trisha. Congratulations on a beautifully crafted film. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be involved with your organization. I'm very excited by this.
Ah, terrific. That's great. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that you had lived in Derry for 5 years. Tell us about that and why that had such an impact on you.
I went to art school in London. I went to Goldsmiths, and I really became interested in the whole community arts movement that was going on in the late 70s in England at that time. And I worked at a community arts project in the East End of London called Camera Work, where we created community darkrooms for people to photograph and make books, tell their own stories. When I was very aware of what was happening in Ireland, you couldn't walk down the street in England without having a consciousness about that, letterboxes blocked off, sort of a nervousness around dustbins, and wanting to
explain that? Why there was nervousness around that?
Well, because of bombs. Letterboxes, there were letter bombs, and there was a fear in the late 70s because of the activities of the IRA in London at that time. And I wanted to understand why. You could pick up a newspaper and read a version of why, but I wanted to know more. And then in the 1980, the women in our prison went on a no wash protest, and that for me was kind of my wake up call. I wanted to understand more about that, so I went to Ireland to find out more for myself, to understand why people who allegedly were part of the same nation were active in this way. And because I came out of a community arts background and had set up these dark rooms, I went to Derry to set up a community dark room. I got actually a grant from the Prince Charles Trust and from Gulbenkian, which was a big foundation. And I had a little Citroen truck van, and I put camera equipment, darkroom equipment into the back of the van, and I moved to Derry, crazy, totally crazy, and set up this darkroom and worked with young people so that they would tell their own stories. The moments when the dominant media went home after the big events that would happen, they would leave and life would continue on a day-to-day basis. And I wanted to support young people telling that narrative, the quotidian realities of living under occupation in the North.
Wow, interesting. You know, one of the things that whenever the Troubles were covered, it was always after one of the major acts of violence by one side or the other. But the context and the world in which the civil rights movement took place wasn't covered. The bang bang was covered and some political back and forth, but you didn't get that sense. And so good for you to actually go there and experience it for yourself. What surprised you the most when you got there about what you found?
Well, people were very warm to me. I mean, I had this English accent. I came from London. Um, I was I was an active feminist. Um, but when I arrived in Derry, I lived in the Roswell Flats, which was the scene of Bloody Sunday. They're no longer there. And within about 2 weeks of my arrival, there was a supergrass. That was the era. And many of my neighbors were arrested and disappeared. And despite that, people treated me very well. There was no suspicion. On the contrary, I was really invited into people's homes in a way, it was like family. I felt very, I mean, it was essentially a war zone at that moment. Everywhere there were Saracens, there were British Army on the streets, but I felt ironically at home there. And I went for a year and I stayed 5 years.
Huh?
It was hard to leave.
Mhm.
And I think those years really, really changed me as a human being. They've never left me. Um, and the people that I met then, I remain very much in contact with. So they became part of my identity, in essence. And I think making this film on Jerry was for me, I wouldn't say exercising because that's about removal, but it was very much revisiting, let's put it like that, a part of who I am as much as it was his narrative and the narrative of struggle that took place leading up to the peace process from the 70s onwards.
And so to be clear, the community you were in was the so-called Republican community, not in the American sense, but the Catholic community who were
Yeah, I lived in the Bogside, which
Mhm.
is a nationalist. I mean, Derry is dominantly nationalist anyway. I lived.
nationalists. So for Americans who don't,
Oh,
nationalists are
sorry.
the mostly Catholic, or no, not completely Catholic, who believe in a reunified Ireland.
Yes, it was
right.
people who believed that the island of Ireland should be one and not part of the United Kingdom.
Mhm.
And within that, politics would be quite on different levels, but that's what people predominantly shared in common.
Mhm.
Yes, I don't really ever use the term Catholic or Protestant. I don't think it's helpful. It's a colonial conflict, and that manifested itself through religion. But really, when you take away all those layers, it's nothing to do with religious differences, especially today when the church, especially within the nationalist community, is less and less significant.
Mhm. Right. So you had an amazing career all over the world. You lived in the States, but Ireland never left you. And why in 2018 do you think Jerry agreed to sit down with you for this film?
Well, I think it's a good question. Actually, he should answer that. Um, he had already decided to step down as a TD. A TD is a member of the Irish Parliament. He had already made the decision that he would no longer be the president of Sinn Féin. So I think it was probably, don't want to put words into his mouth, but I think he was possibly at a moment of his life of reflection. He'd been, active politically um, in in one level that was very demanding. And it was a moment of change for him. He is still incredibly active. It wasn't that he was stopping being politically active. He remains beyond uh, involved in issues to this day. But it was change. The bureaucracy of Parliament was leaving his reality. All those meetings and having to be there for votes or whatever in the south. His family live in the north. I think he'd come to a point in his life where he's a writer. Jerry's written 20 books. I think he realized he wanted to, use the years he had in the most influential way possible and for himself. So maybe the film was part of that moment of change. I wouldn't call it closure, but a moment of shifting from one form of activism to another. And I just happened to go and see him at the right moment. I mean, maybe
Mhm.
just that serendipity.
Right. That's amazing. Um, the he's no stranger to microphones over the course of his political career. I mean, we would see. I worked in England for a long time during that period, but a real stranger to sitting down with somebody to talk about himself. And when we spoke earlier, you thought perhaps the crew you had with you might have been part of the reason that he was so comfortable and opened up in the way that he did. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, even though I have a English accent and come historically from England, I live in Mexico. I'm a Mexican citizen. I have a Mexican son. And I've only been a filmmaker while I've lived here. So my identity here is as a documentary filmmaker, and I work always with the same crew. They're my film family.
Mhm.
We're very close. It's very relaxed. I work with a tiny crew. We help each other. We set lights up. We carry equipment. There's no kind of division between the different levels. We're too small for that. Worked with my cinematographer, I've worked with for many years on all my films, actually. And so the crew that came with me from Mexico to Ireland, bilingual, they speak English, but they don't have that same relationship to the Irish question that a crew would have if they came from England or even the north of Ireland. So they had no context for what Jerry was saying. And I wondered afterwards that maybe that also allowed him to be more open. He wasn't having to think, oh, they're going to go down the pub afterwards and gossip about what was discussed on camera. And so maybe that had a influence to a small degree on the intimacy of it. I also have known Jerry for almost 40 years, so there was a sense of trust in our discourse, and so I think it was different for him, but there were very clear boundaries. Um, I wasn't to film his family. Jerry has been shot. His house has been attacked. And so before we filmed, I didn't ever discuss with anyone where we were filming. Um, and and there was just he was very clear about his constraints, which were basically just family issues. I wasn't to film his family. And of course, I wanted to. I mean, that was for me a hard one. I wanted to show him absolutely in his world, and his world, a huge part of his world is his family. So I didn't have that. Um, but I also had my constraints on him that I would make all the decisions, that this was my film. It wasn't a propaganda piece. It was my choice what I put in the final cut. And I would show him the film in terms of accuracy. And that was all. And he had the right to comment on that, but not on the content. And we both lived up to that agreement.
Mhm. So you chose not to do a sort of traditional he said, she said kind of documentary about the troubles or the conflict. How did you get to that, and what did you hope to accomplish by making the film?
It started out going to include other voices. Um, and we filmed other voices. I had this idea to film different characters holding photographs. I don't know what I should do something with the footage because it's great. So, for example, the very famous pictures of the no wash protest of the hunger strike in the prisons in Long Kesh. We actually went into Long Kesh with Lawrence McCune, who's one of the surviving hunger strikers. I think he was the 11th or 12th hunger striker. The hunger strike actually ended with 10 hunger strikers dying. Lawrence came off the hunger strike, I believe, after 72 days. He was on the brink of death. So we went with Lawrence with a picture. We went with three women who were mothers. We went with a woman prisoner from Armagh. With different characters, we took photographs and filmed them in their locations with the idea there would be other voices around Adam's voice, but it didn't work. So in the end, I just made the decision the film would just have his voice. It would just be Jerry talking, and around that, I would research and put in, as you said earlier, photographs and archive material to accompany his voice. It would be his story. That's it. Keep it very simple.
Mhm.
And so that's the structure I went after. I wasn't interested in making a film that was about balance. Okay, you film Jerry Adams, so you film Ian Paisley. You film Bill Clinton talking about Jerry Adams or Tony Blair or a Protestant minister or someone else. I wasn't interested in that. That's TV. That's a program. I wanted to make something that was cinematic using the language of film and that became just about his reflection. You have maximum 2 hours, to tell the
Mhm.
story of 60 years of someone's life as an activist. And in that, of course, he's telling the story of the conflict. So that was how I ended up doing it, but it wasn't initial. It was a process of of kind of removing things and being very clear and absolutely not wanting my voice in the film. I don't think anybody's interested in in my interviewing Jerry Adams. I think him talking directly to the audience is much more interesting. So that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. It is, I could see a whole separate exhibition of the photographs and the video of those other characters in the story at some point, because I'm sure that was
Yeah,
really.
I would like to go back to it. One of the things that I've thought about actually, because I transcribed all the interviews and there were a lot of them, was doing a book, um, more for universities, something like that, where you have it where the transcripts become like a film script, and that would be something, even if it's online, so that
Mhm.
that would become a historic document that researchers could use, because we talked about many things that didn't end up in the final cut of the film,
Right.
mostly because of time.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bear. So Jerry is famous for having said he never was a member of the IRA. Journalist historians claim he was. In the film, he, on several occasions, does not disavow the IRA. And what's I mean, people get very hung up on that. But I think he spoke volumes in the way said he didn't disavow the IRA, but then disavowed several things that took place that were more than he was willing to support. And without his ever addressing was he or wasn't an IRA person, I think he expressed a lot about his views about this armed struggle. And were you looking for that? Were you trying to move him in that direction, or that just came out of the conversation?
Well, there were elephants in the room, of course, and that's I mean, that needed addressing. If he hadn't spoken in the way he did, I think the film would be kind of a bit of a fluff
Mhm.
piece, to be honest. Um, I think he made his position very clear. And I mean, I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing, but he says actually, let me be very clear. And then he says, I will never disavow myself from the men and women. Actually, he says women and men is how he says it, of the Irish Republican Army. And and then he talks about his deep respect for these largely working class women and men who stood up against the British Empire. Um, so his solidarity is made very, very clear. And then he goes on to say, however, the IRA made many mistakes, or I don't know if he says many, but he says certain mistakes. And then he names some of them of that should never have happened. And I don't think I may be wrong on this, but I don't think we've ever heard him speak so clearly about that in any interview. Um, I don't think we have. That that's his that is his position, and I think for me, he certainly answered the question on camera.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a really fascinating way for him to address the issue. And it was honest, and you take away from it what you take away from it, you know.
I think
Um,
that's
yeah. So I want to get back to more of Jerry, but I have to talk about the production values that are absolutely extraordinary. The the work with stills is brilliant. I think I heard that you found a French photographer who had taken a load of stills during that time, but they hadn't been seen before, so you were able to incorporate some of those into the project. Talk a little bit about how you went about finding all of the material, the film, the stills.
There's a fantastic community organization in Belfast called the Belfast Archive, and some of the some of the images came from that. I also worked with one of the photographers. I needed things like how was I going to visually show colonialism? And so I thought around the Belfast City Hall, there are all these sculptures, including Queen Victoria. So we went, he went and Frankie Quinn, he's called. Frankie went and photographed it for me. And then we wanted to film uh, where the peace talks happened. And he went to the monastery and photographed inside there for me. So I was very lucky to have somebody so supportive. The poster is also an image, an earlier image of Jerry Adams by Frankie. So I couldn't have made this film without him. And he has an above the line credit. Then there was this French photographer called Gerard Halley. And Gerard I didn't know him, but he knew a close friend of mine who's French and has lived in Belfast many years. And she put me in touch with him. And he just sent me a hard drive with every single shot that he'd taken, everything that he'd taken during the years in the 70s when he was in Ireland. It was over 4,000 images that he'd scanned and gave me. And so I went through all those images, I don't know how many times. Um, and many of those stills are from him. And then there are others. There are, obviously quite a lot of other photographers. I worked in the 80s in a photography collective in London called Network. And we did a book, two photographers from the collective, and I did a book called Still War, playing on the pun of a still, as in a photograph, and war. And Mike Abraham's one of those two photographers. His photographs are also in the film. So, I mean, my background is still photography. So, a lot of the photography images I got from the help of different archives, different supporters, and then the film footage, I went to some of the traditional archives and spent a lot of money on getting that material because it costs a fortune. But then there's this other filmmaker called Donald Foreman, and Donald's father. He's actually buried in the graveyard in West Belfast, Arthur McCaig. And Art McCaig made many films in the 70s. He was absolutely beloved. And Donal, his son, gave me access to all his father's films.
Wow.
So those were the biggest helps that I got was Donal, Frankie, and Gerard. They were kind of my backbone, and then everything else was kind of accumulated oh, over over a year, basically, of
Wow.
research.
And then the sound design, because when you're using stills and you're using archival footage that may have no sound, you had a wonderful sound designer and a brilliant composer. So it's just such a wonderful piece of film. Really beautiful.
And they're Mexican. I mean, my Pablo Lack is my sound designer. I mean, the research he did to find audio of different moments in the history of the conflict was incredible. I mean, we found material of a guy who, during the Ballymurphy massacre, hung a recorder out. Microphone out the bedroom window, and there's just audio. So it's everything, all the sound in that film is authentic, and it gives life to silent, still photographs. Some of the footage was also silent. So it was a massive job for Pablo. And then my composer, Jacobo Lieberman, Jaco I've worked with on all my films. I mean, he made something that didn't sound kind of cheesy kind of trying to imitate Irish traditional music. And he
Mhm.
used some instruments, but he made something very subtle and different. I think the score is wonderful. Very
Beautiful.
lucky. I work, film in film in Mexico is extraordinary, and I'm very lucky to work with incredibly talented team.
Yeah, beautiful. I wanted to talk to you about women and how powerfully Jerry Adams spoke about the importance of women to the civil rights struggle in Ireland. And I'm sure that's something you experienced when you first went over there. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes, I think, Irish women are extraordinary. The strength of Irish women, and it is, I mean, women who watch their children end up in prison, women out on the streets banging the bin lids, women active inside the political movement, and obviously that has only increased. I mean, the leadership before of the movement was Jerry Adams, Martin McGuinness. It's now the leadership are women. And that is reflected down at all levels of activism that comes out of that level, that out of that um, women active on the street, um, going back years. I mean, is it a matriarchal society? I wouldn't say that, but I think voices of women are very important. The footage in the film of women taking to the streets is fantastic. During the curfew, when there was no food, so women just ignored the soldiers and went out with food to make sure babies had food, and people had access to what they needed. Women attacking the British Army in masses. What did Jerry calls it? The river of women that
Right.
just moved aside. He said that in a when we were filming. Uh, Rivers of women, and I had to go out and find the footage of what he said, and I found it. But because to me that was such a powerful image. Uh,
Mhm.
but I think, yes, I think Irish women are kind of the backbone of that struggle, and it shows on every level today as well as back then.
It's fascinating to me how today, 60 years into his activism, Ireland is still not a united country, but he's very optimistic. Um, why do you think he's that optimistic?
I imagine that that comes from being on the ground and going around the country and talking to young people, and who, I mean, there needs to be a referendum, and the Irish government, um, that was part of the Good Friday Agreement, and the Irish government at some point will have, I imagine, I hope I'm not saying this incorrectly, but they will have no choice but to hold a referendum. Now, they held a referendum on same-sex marriages. They held a referendum on abortion rights, and overwhelmingly, the south of Ireland, the Free State, voted in favor of those things. Perhaps there is a fear. I think there's a genuine fear of unification within the South, and it's a process of talking and changing people's minds and being active on a grassroots level, and that is the power of Sinn Féin, the party of which Adams was the president, is that people turn to Sinn Féin if there was a problem with their housing, if there was a problem around a health issue, whatever it was, just in the quality of people's day-to-day lives, of just grassroots long-term political activism. And with that, you get a core support and you hear people's arguments. And I think that's what they have been doing throughout the island of Ireland for many years now, building a core support and voices. And when we showed the film in Galway, that night I was wandering around, not wandering, but I was walking through the town, and I was with my brother who'd come with me and some friends, and we went to just a regular bar full of young people to listen to some music in Galway. And people had been to see the film and they came up to me, kids are 18, 19, 20, that young people, and they wanted to talk about the ideas in the film. That for me was the best moment in the whole process of me making this film, was that it wasn't a history film. It was a film about, yes, of course, it's a film about Gerry Adams, but it was a film that people who didn't live in the North, who hadn't grown up through sectarianism or conflict, or were the children of people who had and had heard about it from their parents. These were young people in the south of Ireland who connected in some way with the issues. And for me, that was the most powerful thing that made the 5 years of making this film worthwhile, basically, because it resonated, it had relevance to their lives. So as a filmmaker, I don't think it gets better than that.
Absolutely. Well, that must have been an amazing evening for you. And I look forward to more screenings. I'm hoping for screenings in this country. That would be amazing. What plans do you have for screenings going forward?
Well, yesterday actually was interesting. We got invited to a film festival in northern Syria. Um, so it's going to have subtitles in Kurdish subtitles and Arabic subtitles. And I am hoping with the Arabic version of the film that we actually get to show it in the West Bank. I believe there are still cinemas on the West Bank, but certainly when I was filming there was a cinema in Ramallah. For me, that would have meaning. And in other countries, other Arabic countries, in Spain, since I spoke with you, we've been invited to two human rights festivals and one in Italy. So I think that's the world this film is going to play into. I think that's where the film belongs. It belongs it's less a red carpet film, um, in a kind of dominant cultural sense. I think it's a film that will end up in festivals exactly like your organization and what you're doing. A film, places that are committed to ideas, to education, to human rights. And I think the film is needed at this time. It's a film where there was a conflict, where people didn't talk to each other, where people took up the gun as a way of solving issues, that then they laid down the gun and they talked to each other and they came up with potential solutions that would take those communities to a different place and a better quality of life for everybody, where you had to listen to ideas that weren't your own ideas in order to have the quality of life that you want. I think that's an essential example for the world we're in today. Um, and that's why I think the film is important, and that it gets shown in those kinds of festivals matters matters most. So yes, it's going to be shown. I think right now the other festival in the States is in Newport Beach in California. It's in October. It's called the Newport Beach Festival. We've applied to a lot of festivals in the US, and for me, the most important thing is to get distribution. Festivals are one thing, but distribution is what matters, and educational distribution. So the film is available in university libraries. I mean, that's my goal.
Yes. Well, I have a feeling you'll reach your goal. You're a very committed person. Thank you so much for making the film, for sharing this time with us. And again, congratulations on Jerry Adams, the Ballymurphy Man. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.